Imagine you are standing in the middle of a desert. The sun is burning, the sand goes on forever. There is nothing around you, no city, no road, no store. Now imagine carrying heavy bags of silk, gold, and spices. You have been walking for 20 days. You are tired. You are thirsty. But you keep going. Why? Because somewhere far away, across the desert, across the ocean, someone is waiting. And they will pay a fortune for what you are carrying. This is the story of the ancient trade empires. It is the story of how ordinary men and women, merchants, sailors, and camel drivers connected the entire world. Long before the internet, long before airplanes, long before phones, they did it with courage, with camels, and with ships. Today, we are going to travel back in time. We are going to visit the ancient world. A world without maps, without GPS, and without global banks. In this world, people still wanted things they could not find at home. A person in China wanted gold from Africa. A person in Rome wanted black pepper from India. A person in Egypt wanted silk from the Far East. This desire, this deep want for things from far away, created something powerful. It created trade. Trade means buying and selling goods with other people. And when trade grew large enough, it built empires. An empire is a large, powerful group of lands and people controlled by one ruler or one city. Some empires were built with armies. But the greatest empires of the ancient world were built with something else, with commerce. Commerce means the buying and selling of goods, especially between countries. Commerce built roads. Commerce built ports. Commerce built cities. And commerce connected cultures that had never met before. This is the story of how it all happened. To understand trade empires, we must first understand the world before them. Thousands of years ago, most people lived in small villages. They were farmers and hunters. They grew their own food. They made their own clothes. They built their own homes. Life was simple and very local. But slowly, something changed. People began to notice that the land around them was not equal. Some places had rich soil for farming. Other places had thick forests full of wood. Some regions were full of metal, copper, iron, and tin. Other regions had nothing but sand. This difference between places created a problem, but it also created an opportunity. The opportunity was simple. If you have something I need, and I have something you need, we can trade. We can exchange. Exchange means giving one thing and receiving another thing in return. This simple idea, exchange, was the seed. And from that tiny seed, an entire world of trade would grow. The first traders in history were brave people. They had no roads, no maps, and no protection. They traveled through dangerous places, mountains, deserts, and open seas. But they kept going. The earliest trade routes, or trading paths, appeared around 3000 BCE. BCE means before the Common Era. It refers to time before the year 0 in our calendar. So 3000 BCE is about 5,000 years ago. These early routes connected the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Mesopotamia is the ancient name for the land between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This area is in modern-day Iraq. Mesopotamia and Egypt were two of the first great civilizations. A civilization is a large, organized society with cities, laws, writing, and culture. Traders from Mesopotamia carried wool, grain, and metal tools. Traders from Egypt carried gold, linen, a type of cloth made from a plant, and papyrus. Papyrus was an early form of paper made from a river plant. These first exchanges were small, but they proved something important. People on opposite sides of a desert would trade if the reward was great enough. And the rewards were about to become very, very great. Here is something important to understand. Geography shaped trade. Geography means the physical features of the earth, mountains, rivers, deserts, and oceans. Some places had a natural advantage. A natural advantage means something good that comes from nature, not from people's work. Cities built near rivers had fresh water and flat land for boats. Cities near the ocean could send ships in all directions. Cities at the crossroads of two land routes became meeting points for caravans. A caravan is a group of traders traveling together across a desert or long land route, often using camels to carry their goods. Think of geography like a game board. Some squares on the board are very valuable. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt, Carthage in North Africa, and Palmyra in the Syrian desert. They sat at the intersection of land and sea routes. An intersection is a place where two or more paths cross. Whoever controlled these intersections could control trade, and whoever controlled trade could collect taxes. A tax is money that people or traders must pay to a ruler or government. When thousands of merchants pass through your city every year, the taxes they pay make you very rich. This is how geography turned cities into empires. Not everything was worth carrying across a desert. Grain was heavy and cheap. Water was too heavy to carry far. But some goods were light, rare, and incredibly valuable. These were called luxury goods. Luxury goods are special, expensive items that people want but do not truly need to survive. They are symbols of wealth and power. The most important luxury goods of the ancient world were silk. Silk is a very soft and beautiful cloth made from the threads of silkworm cocoons. It was produced only in China for thousands of years. No one outside China knew how silk was made. This mystery made it priceless in Rome, Persia, and Egypt. Spices. Spices like black pepper, cinnamon, and cloves came from India and Southeast Asia. In the ancient world, spices were not just for cooking. They were used as medicine, perfume, and even currency. Currency means money. anything used to buy and sell things. Gold and ivory. Gold came from the mines of Africa and Arabia. Ivory, hard white material from elephant tusks, came from sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan means the area of Africa south of the Sahara Desert. Frankincense and myrrh. These are fragrant resins, sticky substances from trees, used in religious ceremonies and perfume. They came from Arabia and the Horn of Africa. These goods had one thing in common. They were rare, they were beautiful, and powerful people desperately wanted them. That desperation drove merchants to risk their lives on long, dangerous journeys. Where there is desire, there is trade. And where there is trade, there is power. History books often tell the stories of kings and generals, but the real builders of ancient trade empires were the merchants. A merchant is a person who buys and sells goods as their job. Merchants were business people. They were risk takers. They invested their own money or borrowed money to buy goods in one place and sell them in another for a higher price. This difference between the buying price and the selling price is called profit. Profit is the money you earn after paying all your costs. The life of a merchant was hard. They faced real dangers every day. Bandits, criminals who attacked travelers, waited on desert roads. Storms could destroy ships at sea. Governments could seize their goods without warning. Disease was common on long journeys. But successful merchants became extremely wealthy. In ancient Mesopotamia, merchants were called tamkarum. They worked under the protection of temples and kings. They traveled to distant lands carrying silver, cloth, and grain. In ancient India, merchants were organized into guilds. A guild is a group of people who do the same work and help each other. Guild members shared information, protected each other on the road, and set fair prices. In ancient Arabia, merchants led large camel caravans through the desert. Some caravans had hundreds of camels and dozens of guards. These caravans moved slowly, about 30 kilometers per day, but they moved steadily. And they moved reliably. Reliably means in a way that you can trust and depend on. These merchants were not heroes in the military sense. They carried no swords, they built no temples, but they built something more lasting. They built connections between civilizations. By 1000 BCE, trade had grown so large and so organized that it began to create the first true trade empires. The Phoenicians were among the first. The Phoenicians were a seafaring people, people who lived by the sea and traveled by ship. From the coast of modern-day Lebanon. They were master sailors and traders. Their ships sailed across the entire Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea is the large sea surrounded by Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. In the ancient world, it was the most important body of water for trade. The Phoenicians built trading colonies across the Mediterranean. A colony is a settlement in a new land that is controlled by a distant homeland. Phoenician colonies included Carthage in North Africa, which became one of the most powerful cities in the ancient world. The Phoenicians traded purple dye, cedar wood, glass, and metal goods. Their purple dye was especially famous. It was made from sea snails and was so expensive that only kings and emperors could afford it. This is why, even today, we call royal purple purple. It comes from the Phoenician tradition. But the Phoenicians were only the beginning. Far to the east, something even larger was forming. The ancient Silk Road was beginning to take shape. A road that stretched from China to Rome. A road that carried not just silk and spices, but ideas, religions, languages, and diseases. A road that would change the world forever. But that is a story for the next section. Close your eyes and imagine the longest road in the world. A road that stretches over 6,000 kilometers. From the ancient city of Chang'an in China, across the mountains of Central Asia, through the deserts of Persia, and all the way to the ports of the Mediterranean Sea. This road had no asphalt, no signs, no service stations. It was made of dust, sand, and stone. And yet, for over 1,000 years, it was the most important road on earth. This was the Silk Road. The name Silk Road was actually invented by a German geographer named Ferdinand von Richthofen in 1877. The ancient people who used it had no single name for it. To them, it was simply the road east or the road west. But the name Silk Road captures something true. Silk was the most valuable thing carried on it. The Silk Road was not one road. It was a network. A network is a connected system of roads, paths, or routes. Some branches went north through the steppes, the great flat grasslands of Central Asia. Other branches went south through the mountains of Afghanistan and Pakistan. All of them eventually connected China to the Mediterranean world. The road was officially opened around 130 BCE. When the Chinese Han Dynasty sent an ambassador named Zhang Qian westward to find allies. An ambassador is an official representative sent by one government to another. Zhang Qian did not find the allies he was looking for. But he discovered something more valuable, a world full of people eager to trade with China. The Han Emperor saw the opportunity immediately. He sent merchants westward. He built watchtowers and small forts along the route to protect them. And slowly, a river of silk, spices, and ideas began to flow between east and west. The Silk Road did not exist in empty space. It passed through the territories of powerful empires, and each of these empires played a role in the trade system. The Han Dynasty of China controlled the eastern end of the road. The Han emperors encouraged silk production and trade. China held a monopoly on silk for centuries. A monopoly means having complete control over the supply of a product, so no one else can produce or sell it. China's silk monopoly was one of the greatest commercial advantages in history. The Parthian Empire controlled the middle section of the road in modern-day Iran. The Parthians were clever middlemen. A middleman is a trader who buys from one person and sells to another, making a profit in between. The Parthians bought silk from Chinese merchants and sold it to Roman merchants at a much higher price. They kept the two ends of the road, China and Rome, separated on purpose. If Rome and China traded directly, the Parthians would lose their profits. The Roman Empire controlled the western end of the road. Rome was hungry for Eastern luxury goods. Romans loved silk so much that Roman senators, powerful politicians, complained about it publicly. They said Roman men were spending too much money on silk clothing. They said it was making Rome weak. But the Roman people did not stop buying silk. Between these great empires, smaller kingdoms and city-states also prospered. Palmyra in the Syrian desert became one of the richest cities in the ancient world, simply because it sat on the road between Parthia and Rome. Its merchants and rulers grew enormously wealthy from taxing passing caravans. While caravans crossed the deserts, another kind of trade was happening on the water. The ancient sea routes were just as important as the Silk Road, and in some ways, even more efficient. Efficient means doing something well, without wasting time, money, or energy. A single large ship could carry as much cargo as hundreds of camels. The most important sea trade route of the ancient world connected Rome, Egypt, Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia. It used the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean trade route was powered by a remarkable natural phenomenon. A phenomenon is something in nature that is remarkable or difficult to explain. That phenomenon was the monsoon wind. The monsoon is a seasonal wind that blows in one direction for part of the year, then reverses and blows in the opposite direction. In summer, the monsoon blows from the southwest, pushing ships from Arabia toward India. In winter, it reverses, pushing ships from India back toward Arabia and Africa. Ancient sailors discovered this pattern and used it brilliantly. They timed their voyages with the seasons. They left Arabia in June with the summer monsoon and arrived in India. Within weeks, they returned in December with the winter monsoon. This system turned the Indian Ocean into a reliable highway. The word reliable here means something that works consistently and can be depended upon. The port cities along this route became fabulously wealthy. Alexandria in Egypt was the western anchor of the sea route. It was one of the largest and most sophisticated cities in the ancient world. Dozens of languages were spoken in its markets. Merchants from every civilization came to buy and sell. On the eastern side, ports in India, like Baragaza on the western coast and Puhar on the eastern coast, received Roman gold coins, wine, and glass. In return, they shipped out pepper, cotton, pearls, and precious stones. Here's a question that might surprise you. How did ancient governments actually make money from trade? The answer is taxation. We have already learned that a tax is money that people pay to a ruler or government. But ancient trade taxation was a complex and sophisticated system. There were several types of trade taxes in the ancient world. The first was the customs duty. A customs duty is a tax paid on goods that cross from one territory into another. When a caravan entered a new kingdom, the ruler's officials, tax collectors, would inspect the goods and calculate how much tax was owed. This was usually a percentage of the goods' value. The second was the port tax. Ships arriving at a port had to pay a fee to unload their cargo. Controlled by the rulers of Egypt, charged a 25% tax on all imported goods. 25% is a very large tax. But merchants still came because Alexandria was the only major port in the region, and they had no choice. The third type was road tolls. A toll is a fee paid to use a road, bridge, or route. Caravans crossing through the territory of a kingdom had to pay tolls at checkpoints. A checkpoint is a place where travelers must stop and be checked by officials. These taxes created enormous wealth for rulers. The Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt controlled Egypt after Alexander the Great's death, built much of its power on port taxes from Alexandria. The Kushan Empire of Central Asia grew rich from taxing Silk Road caravans. But there was a tension in taxation. If taxes were too high, merchants would look for alternative routes. They would find other roads, other ports. They would avoid your territory entirely. Smart rulers understood this balance. They kept taxes high enough to be profitable, but not so high that merchants went elsewhere. This tension between taxation and trade freedom is one of the oldest economic problems in history, and it is still discussed today. Of all the luxury goods carried on ancient trade routes, spices may have been the most powerful. Today, you can buy black pepper for a few cents. You can find cinnamon in any grocery store. But in the ancient world, spices were as valuable as gold. Sometimes they were more valuable. Why? Because spices were rare and people desperately wanted them. Black pepper came from the Malabar coast of India, the southwestern coast of modern India. It was called black gold by Roman traders. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid partly in pepper. In 408 CE, when the Visigoth king Alaric demanded a ransom to stop attacking Rome, his demands included 3,000 pounds of pepper. Read that again. A king demanded pepper as a condition of peace. Cinnamon came from Sri Lanka, the island just south of India. Cloves came from the Maluku Islands in modern Indonesia, a tiny chain of islands so remote that they were called the Spice Islands. Nutmeg also came from these islands. For centuries, the exact location of the Spice Islands was one of the most closely guarded secrets in the trading world. The Arab merchants who controlled the sea routes to India and Southeast Asia kept this secret carefully. They invented stories about where spices came from. Some told Roman merchants that cinnamon was gathered from the nests of giant birds. Others said pepper grew in forest, guarded by snakes. These stories were not true. They were designed to protect the monopoly. If Roman merchants knew the truth, that you could sail directly to India and buy spices cheaply, they would cut out the Arab middlemen entirely. The desire to find a direct route to the Spice Islands would eventually drive European explorers across the globe. But that is a story for many centuries later. History often forgets the people who did not leave written records. Most ancient merchants were men. At least, that is what the records show. But the history of trade is also the history of people history forgot. In many ancient societies, women played important roles in trade, even if they rarely traveled the roads themselves. In ancient Mesopotamia, women ran textile workshops. Textile means cloth and fabric. Women wove wool and linen into cloth, which was one of the most important trade goods of the ancient world. Merchant families depended on women's labor to produce the goods that men carried on caravans. Some ancient texts from Assyria, a powerful kingdom in Mesopotamia, contain letters written by merchant wives to their husbands on the road. The letters give instructions about business, how much to charge for cloth, which customers to trust, when to buy more silver. These women were not just housewives, they were business partners. In sub-Saharan Africa, women were central to local trade networks. They controlled the markets, they set prices, they extended credit, meaning they allowed buyers to pay later. In many West African trading communities, this role continued for thousands of years. And across the Indian Ocean, the crews of trading ships came from dozens of different backgrounds. Arab, Indian, African, and Southeast Asian sailors worked side by side. They learned each other's languages, married into each other's families, and created entirely new mixed cultures along the coast. Trade did not just move goods, it moved people. And people bring their cultures with them. We must be honest. Ancient trade was not only beautiful and glorious, it had a very dark side. When people from different parts of the world come into contact, they share more than goods and ideas. They also share germs. A germ is a tiny living thing, a bacterium or virus that can make people sick. People who lived in isolated regions had no immunity to diseases from far away. The Antonine Plague struck the Roman Empire between 165 and 180 CE. This plague is believed to have been smallpox or measles. It killed an estimated 5 million people. Later, the plague of Justinian in the 6th century CE may have killed up to 50 million people. Many historians believe it traveled the same sea trade routes that connected Egypt, the Middle East, and Europe. And centuries later, the Black Death, the most devastating plague in human history, traveled the Silk Road from Central Asia to Europe in the 1340s. It killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population. Trade connected the world, but connection has consequences. The same roads that carried silk and spices also carried invisible killers from one civilization to another. This is one of the most important and sobering lessons of ancient trade history. By the 600 CE, the world of ancient trade was changing dramatically. The Roman Empire had weakened. The Parthian Empire had fallen and been replaced by the Sassanid Persian Empire. The old land routes through Central Asia were becoming more dangerous. Nomadic groups were disrupting the Silk Road caravans. Into this changing world came a new force, the Arab traders of the Arabian Peninsula. Arabia had always been important for trade. The Arabian Peninsula sits at the center of three continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe. Arab merchants had traded frankincense, myrrh, and horses for centuries. But after the rise of Islam in the 7th century CE, the Arab world united. The Arab world united under a common religion, a common language, and a common set of trade ethics. Ethics are rules about right and wrong behavior. The Islamic faith actually encouraged commerce. The Prophet Muhammad himself was a merchant before he became a religious leader. Islamic law created rules for fair contracts, honest weights, and ethical trade. Islamic scholars wrote detailed guides for merchants. This cultural respect for trade gave Arab merchants an enormous advantage. The Islamic caliphates quickly expanded across the Middle East, North Africa, Persia, and even into Spain and Central Asia. A caliphate is a state governed by Islamic law, led by a caliph, who is both a religious and political leader. This expansion did something remarkable. It created a vast, unified trading zone. Within the caliphate, merchants could travel from Spain to India speaking one language, Arabic, and using one trusted legal system. This reduced the friction of trade. The Arab Golden Age of trade had begun. Between 800 CE and 1400 CE, the Indian Ocean trade network reached its greatest height. Arab, Persian, Indian, East African, and Chinese merchants all participated in this vast system. Ships called dhows crisscrossed the Indian Ocean, carrying cotton, gold, ivory, porcelain, and spices. Porcelain was made in China and was so prized in the Islamic world and in Africa that it became a major trade good. The East African coast became deeply integrated into this trading world. Swahili city-states appeared along the East African coast. Cities like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar became wealthy trading hubs. These East African cities exported gold, iron, ivory, and enslaved people. In return, they received porcelain from China, cotton from India, and glassware from the Middle East. The Swahili language itself is a beautiful reminder of this trade history. Swahili contains many Arabic loanwords. Words like biashara, meaning business, and duka, meaning shop, come directly from Arabic. The language is living proof of centuries of cultural exchange. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Indian Ocean, the great maritime empire of Srivijaya rose in Southeast Asia. Srivijaya, based on the island of Sumatra in modern Indonesia, controlled the Strait of Malacca, the narrow sea passage between the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra. The Strait of Malacca was one of the most important choke points in world trade. Every ship traveling between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea had to pass through it. Srivijaya taxed them all. In the early 1400s, China made one of the most extraordinary moves in all of trade history. The Ming Dynasty Emperor Yongle ordered the construction of the largest wooden ships ever built. These ships were called treasure ships. They were enormous. By comparison, Columbus's ship, the Santa Maria, was only about 25 meters long. The man chosen to command these fleets was a Muslim court official named Zheng He. Zheng He was brilliant, diplomatic, and deeply knowledgeable about trade. Between 1405 and 1433, he led 7 great voyages across the Indian Ocean. His fleets visited Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and the East African coast. These were not voyages of conquest. China was not trying to build colonies. The voyages were diplomatic and commercial. Zheng He's mission was to demonstrate China's power and wealth, to establish trade relationships, and to bring back exotic goods, including live giraffes, which were presented to the emperor as magical creatures. The treasure fleets were an incredible demonstration of what ancient trade could look like at its greatest scale. Hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of sailors, soldiers, translators, and doctors. A floating city moving across the ocean. But then, suddenly, the voyages stopped. After Zheng He's death and the death of Emperor Yongle, a new political faction gained power in China. This faction believed that trade and foreign contact were dangerous. They believed China was self-sufficient and did not need the outside world. China turned inward. It banned overseas voyages. It even began to destroy the great ships. The door that Zheng He had opened was shut. And while China closed its door, a new power from the other side of the world was beginning to open its eyes toward the ocean. Europe was coming. The story of ancient trade empires ends, and a new, more violent chapter begins with the arrival of European explorers in the late 1400s. Portugal was the first. Portuguese sailors, funded by Prince Henry the Navigator, began exploring the African coast in the early 1400s. They were looking for a sea route to the Spice Islands. They wanted to cut out the Arab and Venetian middlemen who controlled the spice trade between Asia and Europe. Venice, a city in northern Italy, had become fabulously rich as the western endpoint of the Indian Ocean and Silk Road trade. Venetian merchants bought spices and silk from Arab and Byzantine merchants and sold them to the rest of Europe at enormous profit. The rest of Europe resented this. They wanted their own direct access to Asia. In 1488, the Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias rounded the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. This proved that a sea route from Europe to India was possible. In 1498, Vasco da Gama completed the journey. He sailed from Portugal, around Africa, and arrived in Calicut on the southwestern coast of India. When he returned to Portugal with a cargo of spices, his profit was 60 times the cost of the entire voyage. 60 times! Think about that. The ancient Arab and Indian monopoly on the spice trade was broken. The Indian Ocean, which Arab and Indian merchants had dominated for 1,000 years, was now being entered by European warships. It was not a peaceful arrival. The Portuguese used cannons and military force to seize control of key ports. They attacked Arab trading ships. They built forts at choke points. Within decades, they had violently disrupted a trade system that had functioned peacefully for centuries. The age of ancient trade empires was ending. The age of European colonial trade empires was beginning. The ancient trade empires are gone. The caravans no longer cross the Silk Road. The dhows of the Arab traders no longer dominate the Indian Ocean. But their legacy is everywhere. Legacy means the lasting impact that something leaves behind long after it is gone. The religions of the world spread along trade routes. Buddhism traveled from India to China along the Silk Road. Islam spread from Arabia to East Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia through merchant networks. Christianity spread through the Roman trade world. These religions did not spread primarily through conquest. They spread through contact, conversation, and commerce. The foods we eat today are a direct result of ancient trade. Black pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves are in kitchens around the world because ancient traders risked their lives to carry them across oceans and deserts. The chili pepper, originally from the Americas, spread to Asia and Africa through trade routes opened by European explorers. Today, it is impossible to imagine Thai food, Indian food, or Korean food without chili. Yet chili was unknown in Asia before the 1500s. The languages we speak carry the fingerprints of ancient trade. The word sugar comes from the Arabic sukar, which came from the Sanskrit sharkara. The word orange comes from the Arabic naranj, which came from the Persian narang, which came from the Sanskrit naranga. Every time you say the word orange, you are speaking a word that traveled the ancient trade routes. The very concept of a global economy, the idea that countries and peoples around the world are economically connected, comes from the ancient trade empires. They proved that connection was possible. They proved that exchange created wealth. They proved that cooperation across cultures, across languages, and across religions could build something greater than any single civilization could build alone. Here is the most important thing to understand about ancient trade empires. They were built by ordinary people. Not just by kings and emperors, not just by generals and conquerors. They were built by camel drivers who woke up before dawn, by sailors who watched the stars at night, by women who wove cloth in workshops, by merchants who calculated prices and negotiated deals in foreign languages they barely spoke. These people did not think of themselves as building empires. They were trying to earn a living. They were trying to feed their families. They were trying to bring something valuable from here to there and earn a small profit for the risk they took. But in doing so, in taking that risk, in making that journey, in completing that exchange, they connected the world. They built the roads. They established the ports. They created the systems of trust and law that made large-scale trade possible. The ancient trade empires teach us something timeless. They teach us that human beings, when given the opportunity, will reach across any distance, any desert, any ocean, any cultural barrier to connect with one another. Because connection is what we do. It is what we have always done. The Silk Road may be silent now. The ancient ports may be buried under sand. But the connections those merchants built, the ideas, the foods, the words, the religions, the cultures, are still alive in you and me today. That is the most powerful trade of all, the trade of ideas across time. Hey there, just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like. Write your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.